Hello again. Welcome back to the SunHome project. I'm Jimmy, and I will be designing, building, and testing my idea for the SunHome in the public domain. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can just go look at my first two videos and then come back to this video where I just want to focus on my design constraints and the design philosophy that I've used as I've been developing it in SolidWorks. So first, let me talk about my design constraints. When I was initially thinking about the concept for the SunHome, I knew that I wanted it to be fully expandable because that is really what unlocked it to be a fully functional living space. And I also wanted it to be mobile because I wanted the freedom and optionality that mobility provides. So once you decide that it has to be mobile, that really limits you in terms of your size envelope, but more importantly, it limits the amount of weight that it can be because your tow vehicle has a maximum tow rating. So when I first was developing it in SolidWorks, I was trying to figure out how I could build in all of these slide mechanisms to allow for the expansion, but still be under my total weight constraint. And after I finished the full design in SolidWorks, I was actually way overweight, and I had to go back and iterate the design several times to finally be under my weight limit. And I finally have a design that meets my weight constraint, and we have the green light to proceed forward. So that is what gives me the confidence to start moving into this phase where I'm refining the design and ultimately going to build it. My second big constraint was for self-sufficiency. I knew that I wanted the SunHome to be able to be completely off-grid for extended periods of time. And a lot of people might think that energy is your limiting factor in self-sufficiency. But when you do a quick back-of-the-napkin calculation and take into account the expandability, you find that the total roof area provides more than enough energy or solar capacity to provide enough energy for all of the loads in the SunHome. So it is actually water that becomes your limiting constraint in terms of self-sufficiency and how much water you can carry with you. So you can't carry unlimited water with you, and water is very heavy, going back to our first constraint. So I picked a time of 7 days that I felt that the SunHome needed to be completely off-grid for. Because eventually you will need to go back to society and go grocery shopping or whatever it is. And I felt that 7 days was a good balance between weight and is a normal time cadence that humans are used to. And speaking of time, that leads me to my third constraint. My third constraint is I wanted the SunHome to have an operational life of at least 30 years. And let me talk to you a little bit about my philosophy of why I picked that. I really want the SunHome to be able to be lived in long term or as a permanent home. And when you start thinking about long time horizons, you can't predict the future. So what you end up needing to do is add redundancy, margin, safety factors, and most importantly, make it repairable. Because if something fails, you need to be able to fix it to be able to continue to live in it and use it. So that's really the design philosophy number one, is that the future is unpredictable, so you need to add enough slack in the system so that if you have a failure, it doesn't end catastrophically. My second design philosophy is actually something that I learned from my high school English teacher, and that is to KISS. And when I say KISS, I mean keep it simple, stupid. She applied it to your writing. You should always write simply and succinctly. But I really took that to heart and ingrained that into my being because I find that keeping things simple is often the best way to approach life. And it is how I approached the design for the SunHome as well. Because I find that when you add complexity, you're adding failure modes and unforeseen consequences. So again, I try to keep, when I make a design decision, I'm saying, is this as simple as it can possibly be? My next design philosophy is that when you're looking at solutions and trying to figure out what path to go down, there's always going to be a trade-off. Because when you optimize something somewhere, it's at the expense of something else. So you always need to be aware of what those trade-offs are, and you always need to look at all options and all alternatives before deciding on a final solution. And so, as I was developing this episode and trying to figure out what to say and working with AI on, systems analysis, a word kept coming up that really reflected this design philosophy, which is that all of these pieces have to work together over time. And what word that is actually the definition of is coherence. The SunHome has to be internally coherent, meaning that when you take into account the constraints, my assumptions, the physical design, and reality, they're all in alignment. I'm not trying to hand wave anything. Everything has to work. And the SunHome also has to be externally coherent, meaning that when you take into account wear and tear, human interaction, unknown unknowns, again, the design holds. So coherence is really what holds the entire design philosophy together and is really the lens that I approach every problem from. So I want you to hold these design philosophies in your head and think about them as I start walking through the design in the next few videos. And then as we start to move forward and I start to work on new design problems, or I start to build it and encounter problems, which inevitably I will, how am I applying these design philosophies and coming through those and creating solutions? So I hope this helped orient you to my mentality and how I approach problems, and maybe helped you think how you might approach problems as well. So in the next video, I'll just be focusing on time and my phased approach. I just want to say I am doing this on nights and weekends. So as a single builder, this is going to take a lot of time, and I just want to explain how that's all going to work. All right, we'll see you there.